Yo, what's going on? What's going on? Ready to roll. Kick this month off right. What's going on? Give it a minute or two, let some people pop in here, and then just dive right into things. See what we're looking like. I know it's pretty late, last minute, um, so I might just go through it and then let people play it back. I don't want to take up too much of everyone's time, so I'm just gonna dive right into things, right? So, not much has changed since our Thursday live session. Pretty much same old, right? We are looking for, what is going on with the yield rates and the bonds. What is going on with the jobs reports from last month? Was there any growth last month? Or are we, missing on the expected growth, the anticipated recovery in jobs and job growth last month? So those are two very big things to keep an eye on. Obviously, what's going on in Congress with this whole debt ceiling deadline that's coming up. Although I'm not too concerned about that, right? I'm more so concerned about what's going on with the bond yields and what's going on. I'm more worried about what's going on with the Fed, right? I want to understand and kind of keep an eye on, you know, yeah, because the last time Powell talked, we had some pretty hawkish headlines, right? Some pretty hawkish policy statements, and so we definitely want to keep a close eye on, when do they start tapering? Any other kind of snippets from Powell? I believe he's supposed to talk around the end of this month, so we'll keep an eye on that. But in the meantime, just get ready for whatever goes down with that, and then also looking forward, we need to keep in mind that a lot of the tech earnings are going to be coming up that first week of November. And if we pull up Netflix, let's see, October 19th, right? So we have Netflix earnings actually coming up pretty quickly. And, I'm going to obviously dive into SPY and QQQ, but while I have the Netflix chart pulled up, this is, one of the very few setups I actually really like to the upside this week. I want to keep a very close eye on Netflix. Was a lot of bullish flow coming through in Titan Flow last week. And so I just want to keep a close eye on this name as they start messing around with those highs there. It's important to keep in mind as well that they did a pretty good job throughout the sell-off, holding on to their support, their 20-day support, and kind of rallying there, right? Almost forming this little cup going on here. And so I just want to keep an eye on how do they react around the 619, 620 area. Is there any flow coming in? Because Netflix is a name that doesn't typically get a lot of flow. And so if you see a couple very aggressive buy orders, that could be all it takes to send this thing flying. And so again, being the fact that I think we're 2 or 3 weeks away now from their earnings report, just keep an eye on an earnings run up. And again, if tech starts to shift bullish, so let's go ahead and pull up QQQ, then that's going to be a key name to watch because they've been so strong through the downside on the Qs, right? If you compare these two charts here, that, it would logically seem that they have relative strength. If the Qs turn bullish, Netflix is going to be a very keen name to keep an eye on. Very important name to watch. Excuse me. So, with that being said, I wanted to get that out of the way because that's about the only bullish setup I have this week. And everything can change on a fly, right? Speaking strictly in terms of measured potential and, where is there the most opportunity for profit, it's to the downside. Okay, that doesn't mean that I am going into tomorrow shorting the market right out the gate. But we saw here last week that we just kept on making, running up into supply next day, making a lower high, lower lows, lower high, lower lows. And so now we're on this very important level of support. We obviously had that very volatile session on Friday where we actually sold off below the 100, but then towards the end of the day actually rallied into a green day and reclaimed. So now going forward, we want to keep an eye on this area of support from a technical perspective. But again, we want to watch out for catalysts, right? Because there is a good chance tomorrow that we have an initial spike to the upside, right? And we could run up to 365, 367 on the Qs. And that's all fine and well, but what are the news catalysts coming out that is driving this market, not just for one day, not just a one-day relief bounce, but where is the continued move? What is the sentiment, right? And this is where we keep an eye on those bond yields, which specifically affect tech in a very bearish way when the bond yields spike, right? And so just if we take a look at SPY, you can see that there's been much more volatility and aggression in the Qs than there has in SPY. We can see that SPY actually only tested the 100-day twice last week, whereas the Qs, we had a more aggressive lift to the upside, but we also had more aggressive shifts to the downside, right? So we want to keep a close eye. There is a bit of a disconnect between the Qs and SPY right now, right? And we see it sometimes in rallies when tech is leading a rally. You'll see the Qs start to spike ahead of SPY, and then on these sell-offs that are led by bearish tech headlines, you're going to see that the strength, the most opportunity, best bang for your buck if you're shorting the market is going to be in the technology sector. And so that's something very important to keep an eye on. Watch those yield rates, watch for any kind of tapering headlines. And most importantly, I wouldn't say most importantly, but I would say another very important thing to keep an eye on this week. I believe Friday, we're getting the jobs report data, 8:30 a.m., an hour before market open on Friday. We should be getting new jobs reports, right? How many new jobs were filed in America in September. So we'll get a good sense of, is the Delta variant having a big impact on the jobs market? Did it rally at all from the pretty abysmal August and July numbers, right? So we want to keep a very close eye on those numbers, which again will be coming out this Friday pre-market, and I'll double check and verify that before Friday, but I'm pretty sure I saw that it was going to be this Friday, right? And so following the bearish theme, because in the short term I may be bearish, but again, like I said, we could spike, but I want to stick with my game plan and with, what has been going on in the market. Look, if we go back to basically for about exactly a month actually, we have just overall been in a very aggressive downtrend. And so I talked about in our Thursday session, I don't want to try to catch a falling knife, right? I want to be patient with this sell off because this sell off is unlike anything we have seen in the past year and a half, where it's just been very quick 2-3 day sell offs, and then we make all time highs like nothing ever happened. This is not the same as those little mini sell offs, right? There is some real substance to this current sell off over the past month where you actually have some genuine concerns across the market by investors, not just traders, but big money investors. And so I want to keep an eye on, what do we do around this 100-day? What do we do around last week's lows? How do we react to any kind of news headline? Okay. And so, keeping an eye on that downside, obviously, like I said, on paper, it looks like, this is a pretty good area of support that we could bounce off of. With that being said, we already have bounced off it, right? We bounced off it and defended and bounced up, but we rejected the 20-day. And we talked about 2 weeks ago or I think a little over a week ago, maybe last Sunday session, right? We talked about how this 20-day reclaim is going to be very important if you were a bull. If you believe that the upside, if we were going to just shift right back into this uptrend channel, that we needed to see a clean, crisp reclaim of that 20-day supply. We did not get that. We actually rejected it just about on the nose there and retraced to the downside, right? We sell off and close below the 100, spike above, come back down, spike again, right? So now when you have an area of support that is getting tested 2, 3, 4 times, it starts to weaken that area of support, right? And that's all fine and well. It can still be treated as support. But the issue is there isn't really any big news headlines that are shifting, right? We don't have any new updates. So it's still the same concerns in the market that caused this entire sell off. And we're still waiting to see what happens in Congress with the debt ceiling crisis. We're still waiting to see from Powell how aggressive the tapering is going to be and how the newly hawkish Fed starts to approach inflation and we obviously before last, I think it was about 2 weeks ago, we got that meeting where they said some surprisingly hawkish statements. Initially before that meeting, they were talking about a 12 to 18-month timeline to taper down to zero and get the market back to pre-COVID levels and a normal market that didn't need to rely on the Fed for support, right? And then in this last meeting, they talked about a 6 month timeline. So obviously, that is a very large difference from when you talk 12 to 18 months. All of a sudden, you're talking 6 months, 6 to 8 months, I believe he said, by middle of next year, which would be about 8 months. That's a very aggressive shift in policy, right? And so we need to keep an eye on that timeline. Do they go back to that 12 to 18 month? Do they come closer to the 18 month, or do they keep it 6 to 8 month? Do they keep it closer to 6 months? These are things we need to keep in mind, and that's really going to dictate the direction of this market. As I said, though, there's no point in, trying to predict what happens with the news headlines. We can only take it a day at a time. And so at this point, let's just strictly talk about the technicals. I think we've gotten the news stuff out of the way and the catalyst. Let's just talk strictly about the technicals, right? And so taking all the news headlines out of account, we are on an area of support here. However, we have a very nasty area of resistance looking at the broad market SPY that we have been struggling to reclaim. And so, for me to really shift my mindset to bullish and get into a point where I feel confident buying, not just for day trades, but holding overnight, where I feel comfortable about a less volatile market and that we're not going to slip back to the downside, I need to see a reclaim of this 20-day. And I want to start seeing. Let's start drawing some stuff out here. This is a very important level, right? This 447.3, 447.5, these 444 areas, 445 area, the 440 area, right? We start spiking above these areas and everything starts to fall back in line. And obviously, as I'm drawing out these resistance points, you're seeing them line up with the 50-day, with the 20-day. And so these are the areas that confirm to us that the bulls are back in control, whether that is off of a catalyst or it is just strictly technical analysis. These are the areas we want to watch for confirmed strength, and not just in terms of a 1 day volatile session, right? We want to see closes above, and we want to see consistent pattern of building above these levels. That's where, when we talked about last Thursday how this is not a swingers market right now, those are the indicators you want to shift back to feeling comfortable about swinging with some size in overnight positions and not waking up the next morning and we gap down 8 points, right? Those are the kind of indicators that are going to help you sleep a little better at night with your swing positions, right? And so, obviously, with all those things in mind, there is this looming beast to the downside, which is the possibility that we could trade down to the 200, right? And most likely for that scenario to play out, we're going to need some huge catalysts. We're going to need some very bearish news out of bond yields, out of asset purchase tapering from the Fed. We're probably going to need to see the economy get shut down, or the government get shut down, excuse me, because Congress doesn't come to an agreement on extending the deadline, right? And so we're going to need to see some pretty sizable bearish headlines play out. With that being said, there is great opportunity here, and so I just want everyone to keep an open mind this week, right? I know this was the same thing I said last week, and it's starting to sound repetitive, but it bears repeating. There is not a very specified trend right now, right? Obviously, we have a downside trend, but with the volatility and with the looming news headlines, we could, within 2 sessions, we could easily reclaim all this junk, and next thing you know, we're riding back up to all-time highs, right? That's not out of the question. That would not surprise me in the least. And so, with the level of volatility and with this sort of, this support that we're holding on to, not to sound clickbaity, but it really is kind of a make or break week for the market. As long as some news headlines develop, if it's a quiet week to the news headlines, then we could kind of trade within this channel from 440 to 430, right? That could absolutely happen as well. But I just want people to keep in mind, don't think that I'm going to buy the dip here because we're riding on the 100-day and then kind of gamble to the upside, because there is this looming beast to down to the 200-day, right? And honestly, after the past couple weeks of price action, would it truly shock anybody if we did trade down to the 200-day, right? We saw how aggressive of selling we had last week from 440 all the way down to 428, right? A 12-point sell off. You're talking from 427 to 410. That's an 18-point sell off. That's not too crazy in the grand scheme of things. And so that's where we shift to the Qs, and it's really kind of more or less the same story here. We are kind of at a point now where, yes, we can go ahead and we can reclaim these 371 areas, but what is kind of the mathematics here telling us? Again, take the news headlines out of your head and strictly focus on the technicals and the charts. there is a looming beast of 339, the 200-day moving averages. And so let's just keep those looming beasts in our mind as we trade, right? Tomorrow, if we get a bullish headline and there's bullish price action and we start reclaiming the 5-day moving average and trading up to the 10-day, that's fine. We can hit some quick trades to the upside and profit off it. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. At the same time, let's just be wary that at any moment, a day or two in advance, we could absolutely start retracing lower and taking out some of these lows and trading down to the 200 day. So I just want especially swing traders to be cautious of those levels, right? If we start taking out Friday's lows and confirming below the 100-day, kind of like think about it like the 50-day, what happened, right? We gapped down below the 50, we reclaimed it, but we couldn't really get above the 20. So what do? We trade down to the 100, right? And now kind of the same thing, right? We may trade up to the 50-day and hit our head on it and then retrace lower to our next sort of area of defense, if you will. And so outside of the broad market and outside of the Netflix setup, there is a couple setups I'm keeping a close eye on as we move into the new trading week and the new trading month. Obviously, Square, again, what I'm going to do, guys, is I'm going to throw out some setups for the upside and the downside. And then we're going to have, so that way we have some names to watch in both scenarios, right? And so obviously, Netflix is a setup I really like to the upside. Let's say that we do start crashing below the 100-day moving average. I really like Square's potential to the downside here. If we start, because, really think about it, pretty aggressive sell off last week from 267 down to 235. You talk about a 32-point drop in Square. That is pretty sizable, right? That's fairly aggressive. And so we talk about the Qs on Friday shifting bullish, not bullish, but defending their support. Well, what does Square do during that time? They can't even close above their 200-day moving average. 3 sessions in a row, they failed to close above their 200-day moving average. Now, obviously, we have the EMA here at 231.5, but for a day trade setup, I kind of like taking them below 235, taking out last week's lows, trading it down to the 200-day EMA, and then from there, we have pretty nice room to the downside. Again, the 200-day is an area that they have used as very strong support in the past, but we have had moments of quick volatility with spikes below it. And again, in a scenario where, let's say, the Qs start trading below their 100-day and start shifting closer to that 200-day moving average, and we go into a very, very strong seller's market, this is a setup to keep a prime eye on, right? We start shifting below 235. We get a sneaky entry at 235, trade down to 231, maybe secure some profit to lower our risk. And then from there, we have pretty nice room down to 218. That's a very strong setup to keep an eye on to the downside. I want to take a look at Facebook here, right? So yeah, so I was thinking with Facebook, we're kind of building on this support here, kind of creating our own support at 338. I'm going to call it 338 even. You guys know I like to round down a little bit. I'd rather take a lower entry than enter before the actual entry and then get burned on it. So I always like to round down to an even number. In this case, it looks like about 338.2, but I'm going to go ahead and call it 338. I would like to see a snap below 338 on Facebook. If we get that, we have room down to the 200 support there at 323. Obviously, I'm not going to hold the trade for a 15-point move, right? But if we get a 5 to 10-point move, I think it's entirely possible. Again, if the Qs can slip, this is one of those downside opportunities. And really, Facebook is a nice opportunity to both sides because if the Qs start building above the 100 and start moving, and we start to see some volume step in and we reclaim the 100 on Facebook, all of a sudden we have room from 350 up to 363. So there's really a nice 13 to 15-point potential to the upside and downside in Facebook. I really like this area that they're at right now because, again, it's kind of this middle area where if the market gets aggressive in either direction, we can absolutely capitalize on a run back up to the highs, or we can go ahead and we can trade this thing down to the 200. I just want to be patient and wait for either scenario to confirm. But again, the sell side does look very appetizing in Facebook. So that's another setup I'm watching to the downside. AMD, this is kind of another one that I like to both sides, right? And it's really just a matter of what transponds in the Qs. But again, you see that last week we had some very nice volatile candles, very nice volume here in AMD. And this is a name that, look, if we start taking out 99.6, all of a sudden we have a room to 97.8. We have a room to 94.8. I really like the downside. Again, I'm sell biased pretty much across the market here. There is very few opportunities. Again, you look at a name like Netflix, there's some bullish upside, no doubt about it. But you look at AMD, there's some sell bias here. Again, just like the Qs and just like SPY, there is kind of this big reclaim that the bulls need to make. And look, just like the broad market, AMD hasn't really been bullish since September 2nd. Or you could even go back to August 30th. It's been over a month since the chart has looked very strongly bullish, right? Even on September 27th, I believe this was last Monday, where we finally closed above. What do we do the next day? Oh, well, we just go ahead and we hammer on down below the 50, right? And so this is a name with relative weakness to keep an eye on. Let's see if we start building lower. And we do have some pretty nice room to the downside there. Again, could it go ahead and reclaim its 50-day? Absolutely. But it just looks like, on paper at least, that there is a much more realistic chance that we get some aggressive selling than we do the bulls go ahead and they put in a 6 point move just to trigger our entry. And then next thing what is our upside on this thing, right? And so AMD is a name that I think I would avoid to the upside and just keep an eye on the downside. Snap, this is a name that I like to the upside. Um, just because of the fact that we've been defending the 50-day very well. We have earnings looming in just a couple weeks here. I believe 3 weeks from now, we're going to get earnings on Snap. And Snap tends to have a very nice run up heading into earnings. Obviously, we gapped up very nice off of last earnings, and we're in this big old consolidation phase here, right? But we've been, every time we hit the 50, we tend to have a nice little pop to the upside, right? And even in the extreme scenario of 71 to 83, I would love to catch a move like that. But realistically, building off of this 50, if we start reclaiming the 5 day, I kind of like the idea of going ahead and try to catch an entry on a reclaim of the 5 day, confirm that the bulls are pushing this thing back up higher, and let's catch an earnings run up on this thing, maybe catch it up into the mid 80s. This, to me, is more of a swing trader setup, just because, I would want to at least be in this trade for a week to capitalize off of earnings run up. So I would probably go 4 to 6 weeks out on my expiration date, probably 5 to 10 points out on my strike price, and just see if I can rack up potentially a 10 point move, right? It's not out of the question if we caught a move from 76 maybe to 86. Again, I would probably start trimming before we got there, but definitely very intrigued by that setup in Snapchat. And so those are just some of my main setups. I could throw out a couple more, but I just want to focus on those main setups. And with that, let's go ahead and let's dive into a couple questions here. SoFi, UPST, Santino, bro. You love UPST. I think it's like the fourth live session in a row you asked me about this thing. I might be exaggerating on that, but I remember you asking before. UPST, yeah, I mean, I kind of, didn't I tell you? I'm not even going to pretend I remember. But obviously, the 20-day was very important here, right? Used it as hard support. I think you were looking to short this thing, weren't you? If I'm not mistaken, you were bearish on UPST, and I told you they were in a strong uptrend and they needed to close below the 20. I think that still stands, right? I think that this could potentially be a dip buy opportunity where the bulls step in and you get a nice push back up to the upper 300s, the 360, 370 area. But again, if we close below the 20 here, there is definitely room for correction down to the 50. The one thing about UPST, I think I've traded them a couple times in the past, and one thing I notice is that sometimes the spreads can get a little ugly, and I think it has pretty high IV and the premiums are pretty high. So I don't know if you get the best bang for your buck on this ticker. But the one nice thing about it is you can catch a candle like this from 295 to 330, right? So if you catch a 35-point move, there we go, got it that time, then I don't think it really matters how expensive it is. You're going to profit pretty nice. You made 150? Nice, man. Congrats. Amazon and Queen asking about Amazon, of course. Yeah, I mean, Amazon's one of those names. I love the downside potential. Obviously, we have earnings looming right at the end of this month, but until that time, again, this is one of those setups that could it bounce here? Absolutely, right? I'm not saying by any means that it's going to sell off. I'm just saying that in the scenario that it does start to get volatile and the volume steps in, the downside looks pretty appetizing here, right? Looks pretty appealing. There's definitely room for a 100-point move down to 3170 at the minimum. And I just say that I prefer the downside because look at this mess that we have to reclaim that we rejected the last time we tried to. Again, if you want to kind of draw your line in the sand, if you're bullish on this name, I would look for it to break back above the highs of the last rally. Keep an eye on that 4330 number, which again would also be a reclaim of the 20-day, the 50-day, the 100-day, the 5-day, the 10-day, right? So you're knocking out all of these areas of resistance, and at the same time, you're pushing above the highs of the last. All of a sudden, you're filling this gap. That's kind of my line in the sand to go ahead and shift to bullish mindset on Amazon. But I do want to keep an eye on a knockout of the lows around 32.55. If we start to build below those lows and you start to see the Qs closing above the 100-day, all of a sudden you've got some pretty nice downside room, at least a 50 to 80-point move on Amazon. Definitely a name that I'm going to keep an eye on. I just really hope that if it does happen, that it happens later in the week so that we can capitalize off of cheaper premiums. Obviously, you can get a really nice bang for your buck on Amazon if you trade Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So I do want to keep an eye on that. SoFi. Very volatile. And didn't we look at this name before and it was like, this isn't an options one, right? This is like you can only trade shares. Let me take a look at the options chain if there's one. My initial reaction to looking at this chart, I think that it came down and it defended the 50, and that's kind of its area of support. It likes to defend that area. You can see the 20-50 day area since it's shifted bullish, but I don't know. I mean, this is just it's hard for me to give my opinion on this stock because this is not a name I would ever trade. I just don't really like these like cheaper stocks that are like crazy all over the place. I like the bigger names because you can kind of get an established trend out of it. Let me see. So there's options on it. The actually tight spreads, nice volume, pretty cheap premiums. It's actually not bad. You know what? I kind of take back what I said before. That was kind of dumb of me because I was looking at how volatile it's been, and I was thinking that it's probably like $200 for at the money, but $52, that's not bad at all. Again, just because the options chain looks nice, you still need a good setup. And so I would look for a reclaim of that newly established 200-day, which would start to build above the highs there. Because I would tell you there's a dip buy opportunity. The only issue is it would have been that 15.4, but it already kind of bounced off of that. And then if you come down and test it a second time, all of a sudden it weakens every time you test it. So now you could talk about building to the next leg down. And very weak volume on Friday. So I would want to see a strong volume spike and a close above the 200-day to start building up into the 20s. And yeah, so I would keep a close eye on that. AFRM. Absolutely. Let's do it. Whoa. Pretty nice consolidation there. Still defending its 20, right? I kind of like that consolidation there. I'm just trying to see. Kind of a weird chart because you had like all of this, obviously no volume or volatility, and all of a sudden spiking. So obviously this is some kind of news thing. If RM holding, so I'm guessing this is a SPAC, probably a SPAC or something. I'm gonna look it up. I just like to get a sense of what I'm looking at. You know what I mean? Because even though I'm first and foremost a technical analyst, it's still nice to know, what is the news? What are the big news headlines that are driving this company? Because if there's a huge bullish headline, then I don't like to fight against the trend, right? Just because there might be a quick pop to the downside, I don't like to fight against the trend. I'll just wait for the upside, and that's just because whenever you have a strong catalyst, no chart is always gonna go straight up or straight down, but generally, like let's say there's a massive bullish headline on Apple and they dip a little bit, I'm not gonna just shift bearish on Apple because there's this huge bullish headline, right? So at any moment you could get the hammer dropped and it could just spike to the upside. So I always like to trade with whatever the news headlines are. Um, and kind of formulate my own game plan from there. Because otherwise, I'm like bullish, bearish, bullish, bearish, and I don't like to be like that because it kind of you start to feel directionless, right? And so you want to have a thesis that you feel confident in. Obviously, this chart looks pretty bullish overall. It's holding its 20-day very well. It's kind of consolidating with a small drop into support and then spiking, consolidating with a small drop into support, spiking. I kind of like this area right here, 121. I think that if we break out of this 3-day consolidation, we could start to build up back up into the 130s. And so I would look at that for an entry, and I would just keep an eye on the volume. You know, this volume is trending down. So the fact that it sold off with weak volume kind of tells me that it's probably going to spike back up again soon. Not gonna lie, I don't hate this setup. I might keep an eye on it for my personal watch list. I just want to pull up the options chain and see what does it look like. 5.4, 5.6, 4.9, 5.3. So not terrible. The only thing is you're only making about 8% profit on a dollar move, which I don't love. It's not awful. It's not great. 2-point move gets you about a little over 10% profit. So that's not bad. You just have to be willing to be patient for a larger move. If you catch a 4-point move, you're talking, let me think, 460 to 640 is 180. 360 is about 38% profit. That's not too bad, you know. I don't because it is a name that moves, right? You're getting pretty large wicks here. So, you know, from 121, if you're able to catch a move to 125, I think that's definitely worth the risk you're putting into it. Buy now, pay later company with Amazon, Walmart. Oh, that's pretty cool. I actually like those kind of companies. I was always wondering, like, is there a publicly traded company that's like that? It's kind of like layaway, right? That's pretty cool. I like that concept. Yeah, I would keep a close eye on that setup. But like I said, I like that 121 pivot there. All right, guys, that's gonna do it for me. I've had a very long day, and I'm pretty antsy to get to bed so that I can get up early and keep an eye on the futures. Keep an eye on the idea flow and the Discord. I'll definitely be putting some content out tomorrow morning. And thanks for tuning in, guys. I really appreciate it. You know, it means a lot to us. You know, if you like I said, if you guys have any questions, hit me up in Discord. And have a great night, everybody, and let's kill it tomorrow. All right, take care, guys.